Good evening and welcome to the Cedar Falls Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for September 8th, 2021. There are a variety of ways you can join the meeting tonight. It's great to see so many faces in the room, and you can also join in a variety of ways online. So with that, we will call the meeting to order and roll call vote.
Good evening. Hartley?
Here.
Holst? Mr. Holst is absent tonight. Larson?
Here.
Leeper?
Here.
Lynch?
Here.
Prideaux? Here. Saul?
Here.
Schrod?
Here.
Sears?
Here.
Thank you, Karen. I'd like to take a minute to recognize Abby Sears at your last meeting tonight, Abby. Is that right? Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our August 25th meeting.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, this is the point of our meeting. If you have public comments that are not related to an agenda item, you can come up and speak, or you can raise your hand on Zoom. Is there anyone like to speak to an item that is not on the agenda tonight? Oh, sorry, that was a hand raised not for that question, I think. You want to talk, come on up. But okay, so nobody online?
Nobody online.
All right. With that, we'll go to our old business, and the first item of business is a land use map amendment for a site on the south side of First Street. And Tom, I think you're going to kick us off with this one?
I am. Briefly, we'll go over where the location is. As you can see on the map, it's just to the west of Eagle Ridge Road and Magnolia Drive on the south side of First. It's currently zoned A1, C2, and the majority of it is S1 shopping center. And this is just to give you an idea, 5 acres are roughly going from A1 to the PC or planned commercial district, 2.17 from C2 to PC2, and then the remainder 20 acres will go from S1 shopping center to the PC2. Along with this, because the portion that's ag is currently has a future land use category of medium density residential, this would need to be updated and changed to community commercial since it's commercial type of use. So at the July 26th meeting, there were several issues that were still outstanding. Since that point, one of the inconsistency was the difference between what the Thunder Ridge Development Guidelines had stated and therefore how the property would be developed and land use maps and the landscape maps, all of those were different, so they weren't consistent. Staff felt that needed to be cleared up to make the document a little firmer in the future for developers, for the city. There were also inconsistencies with the building layouts on those original plans and parking lot layouts, and part of the plan recommended that they provide building site locations, but because this development hasn't really, let's say it's sort of speculative because they're not sure what would go in there, we suggested that they remove those specific building footprints, parking lot footprints and such, and just replace it with a category of use. They have done that, and they have come up with 2 categories of use, and you'll see them on the screen. There's the regional commercial uses, such as medical, office, clinics, restaurants, financial services, investment advisors, retail uses, office and research, corporate campus, and then there's neighborhood commercial uses, which would include office uses, grocery store, drugstore, hardware, a cleaner, small retail uses, personal service uses, and convenience store and gas station. So they've broken them down and they're color coordinated on the map. So you see that the neighborhood commercial are in the 2 lots that are to the west of the extension of Lake Ridge Drive. The remainder of it is regional commercial, with the exception there's a a darker green at the bottom, which is just a open space parcel that won't have any development, so there's no land use class on there. We had a particular concern previously too about the maps that showed the detail of what was going to be on the site, had a convenience store, gas station, and restaurants located adjacent to the residential area. They have labeled those as regional commercial, which specifically excludes the gas station and convenience store. And then also they've added some language to the development guidelines that state that certain uses may not be appropriate adjacent to residential uses, and they provided some examples. Staff also noted that there were no standards to address the appearance of buildings with multiple views. On this, I'll go back here. The lots that are between what's going to be an extension of Whitetail Drive over to Lake Ridge, so they front on two streets, the First Street and Whitetail Drive. We had concerns about there weren't any standards for how those buildings should look, because they would be viewed from both streets. So they've come back with some renderings that show what a typical smaller building would look like, and giving us the views from all four sides of the building. In addition, they have put into the design guidelines that the appearance of the buildings with multiple street frontages will have facades that include the use of different textures, patterns, materials, or openings on all the street facades and the rear buildings to create visual interest and architectural rhythm. They've also added to include a restriction on outdoor storage or display areas generally oriented toward the public view. And 3, they added to state that the final building location will be determined during the site plan approval process. And the staff is now satisfied that these inconsistencies between the plan drawings and the development guidelines have been addressed. In addition, there was discussion about the permits for different parts of the development, and the wetland. You can see on there that the wetland on the south part of the property is highlighted in blue. They have addressed plans for wetland mitigation, the right-of-way for the extension of Lake Ridge Drive, that connection across Lot 5 to the RP property, and the NDOT approval will all be done through the Development Procedures Agreement, and some of this will be done with the subdivision property also, so we feel that that has been addressed. The last really big issue is critical infrastructure, and that's the extension of Lake Ridge Drive. This would be the only additional drive to the south to those neighborhoods between Magnolia and Union Road, and that distance right now is a little over a mile. So looking at this map, you can see that there's not really any way, because of previous development, the larger lots, that there's really going to be an opportunity to get another north-south road into there without this property, without the development of this property and the extension of Lake Ridge Drive. And one of the staff's concerns had been the fact that the way the phasing plan was set up, they were going to do Phase 1 contains 16.71 acres of developable property, had 6 lots, and that was 61% of the proposed development. Phase 2 included 2 lots of just 5.64 acres, which is only 21% of the proposed development. The Track D, which is also in that phase, is open space, so there would be no development. And the concern that we had with the phasing plan is the fact that they wanted to extend Lake Ridge Drive from where it actually is green southward through the blue area during Phase 2, but staff is not sure that there'll be an assurance that that'll ever get built or get built in a timely fashion. So we have the solutions that were offered by the staff. Number one, at the beginning, we had suggested amending the phasing plan to include only 5 lots and transferring Lot 7 to Phase 2, which would create more incentive to get the project complete. And then the entirety of the right-of-way would be dedicated during that first phase. Second option or suggestion is to amend the phasing plan so the extension of Lake Ridge Drive occurs in the first phase. They're going to be doing a lot of infrastructure improvements with the relocation of the sewer and the water during phase one. So with the street, they'll be working in the area where the street is. So they could amend the phasing plan and do the development along Lake Ridge Drive and then take Whitetail, the extension of Whitetail Drive in phase two. And the third is to prepare construction plans and a cost estimate for the extension of Lake Ridge Drive, dedicate the right-of-way for the street, and then the developer would pay a fee to the city for constructing the road in the future on a per-acre basis as the plats are approved. So in other words, if we've got 27 acres, when they get ready to final plat it, if we take the overall cost of the improvements, divide it by the 27 acres, and if they plat 10 acres, then you'd take 10 times that per acre cost, and that would be given to the city to put into the fund to construct that in the future. And then this way it would ensure that that equity for construction would be spread over the development instead of relying on that extension to be done with the last two lots. So that puts a lot of pressure on that last lot. I guess it's the end of the slides. So with that, staff would make a recommendation that the land use amendment to change to community commercial would be approved. And secondly, staff does recommend approval of the rezoning request of the property from the Ag C2 and S1 to the PC2, subject to a development agreement that includes one of the staff recommended solutions to ensure that that extension of Lake Ridge Drive, as outlined in the staff report, is built. In absence of such an agreement, the staff recommends denial of the rezoning. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anyone on the commission that has questions for staff? If not, I think we'll, is anyone from the applicant that would like to speak to the item? Name and address, please.
Wendell Lupkus with VJ Engineering, 1501 Technology Parkway, representing me Associates, the owner of the property. Well, we made it 90% of the way. So now we are where we predicted we would be at the determination of what are we going to do about Lake Ridge. I know you got a full agenda tonight, so I'm going to make things as expeditious as possible. But obviously this is a big deal, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history. 1974, when the S1 was developed, there was an agreement with the developer and the city. Mainly it had to do with putting in a bunch of infrastructure, a lift station, force main, a whole bunch of sanitary sewer. And as part of that, the agreement was that when the city determined Lake Ridge, it was Lakeview at the time, needed to go in, that the developer would dedicate the right-of-way and would be assessed for 50% of the cost. 1978, the city accepted all those improvements, paid a certain amount for the sanitary sewer, and reaffirmed the obligation and responsibilities of the developer in relation to the extension of Lake Ridge. Lakeview at the time. Then 1978 also, Cedar Crest Second Edition was platted, and in that platting between Crescent Drive and West 4th Street, there was 40 feet of right-of-way actually dedicated to the city in that plat for the future extension of, at that time it was still Lakeview. Then we go to 1994, when the RP plan on the west side of Lake Ridge, Lakeview, was approved by the city, and the wording in that one was also that when the city determined that Lake Ridge needed to go in, the city would put it in, and that the developer would be assessed 50% of it. So at that point, then there was an 80-foot corridor for Lake Ridge down to the south property line, and then another 40 feet in Cedar Crest, second edition. Fast forward to 1990, no, that was 94. Fast forward to 2004, the city began vacating the right-of-way in Cedar Crest second edition, transferred it to private ownership, and in 2005 replatted it into parts of Pheasant Hollow third edition. The point of this history is that there's been an ongoing effort to keep that corridor open in order to do that. So the question of whether that's a critical street connection is somewhat offset by the city's inaction on one hand and their action on the other hand to vacate the right-of-way. It's our opinion that Lakeview, Lake Ridge is critical when that property develops, either the commercial side or the RP side. We're not asking to go back to those and looking for an assessment, that sort of thing. We want to develop it and develop the property and complete the improvements, but we want to do it as outlined in the subdivision ordinances. We don't see that there's any, especially when, I think we've talked about it before, there's a 325-foot gap for any connection to Crescent Drive. That's beyond our control. So what we did, and up until a week ago Monday, I think the staff and we were on the same page. We have language, and I'm not sure if you were privy to that last version of the developmental procedures agreement that had the language, should the Clark property, that 325 feet, should that Crescent, or should Lakeview be installed in there, then the developer has 4 years to complete the road all the way to First Street. Because if not, what's the point? What's the point in forcing before the natural occurrence of development, the natural development of commercial property or the apartments, which are actually going to be the driving force for Lake Ridge? If that other part isn't completed, why do we need to either take away one of the big lots that's going to already have street frontage, take that out of the equation, or build the street, or collect a big bag of money and put it in the bank until such time that the street's built? It just doesn't make any sense, and I'm not really sure where, under what ordinance or what authority these extra impositions are being made. So I guess I would like to have the commission think about it, and we want to, like I say, we want to be cooperative. We've cooperated all the way along the way, but I think what we're proposing in the written developmental procedures agreement with a very specific sunset clause, if that other portion of Lakeview is completed, it's going to be done. Otherwise, let's just go with the way the subdivision ordinance reads. If we're going to plat something, we're going to build it. It would seem the assumption is by the city that there's not enough economic value in the lots as you go south. In '95, we did the Thunder Ridge West, and at the time they just put in enough street to get to the C-store. I don't know if any of you remember that. Then later, then Walgreens came along. So in order to get Walgreens to go there, we put in 295 feet of 31-foot wide street and 270 feet of 48-foot wide street. Consider that compared to the 330 feet that is from where we're gonna end phase one to where we get to the RP. Those commercial lots are bigger than, well, and it's twice as much as what there was for Walgreens, so the economics is there. It really doesn't need to be leveraged. So I guess I would ask your consideration and move this forward with a positive recommendation to the city council based on the language that's contained in the developmental procedures agreement.
Thank you, Wendell. Does anyone have any questions for Wendell? Wendell, I guess I have one question. Yeah, I think you agree that the road, it needs to happen. I think everyone's in agreement of that. You're in agreement that it will happen. And so we agree on those things. I think the city is just looking for some assurances that it will happen. Is that correct?
Yes. The purview of the commission is to determine whether that road is a critical piece of infrastructure, and then the city will negotiate with the developer on an acceptable form of making sure that occurs in a timely manner. So that development, the commission usually doesn't receive a copy of the developmental procedures agreement. That's something that's negotiated between your recommendation and the city council. So having discussions with a number of city staff and city administration, the last proposal that was given, I think we felt that was a good solution because it proportionally then spread that out amongst all the benefited properties, so that no one or two lots would have all the burden of that cost, making it that much more difficult to sell those final lots for development. Something similar was done with the Wild Horse subdivision for improvements of 12th Street. That agreement is still in place, and we felt that was a good solution to another good solution to the situation. So that is something that city administration feels is an acceptable solution, other than the first two recommendations.
So the question, as I understand it, is our question tonight is this critical infrastructure? And I think you've said yes. The developers even said yes. So that seems pretty straightforward. Are you saying that the two of you will work that out behind the scenes?
I think what we need from the commission is a recommendation on whether to approve it or not, assuming that that piece of infrastructure is a critical piece of infrastructure, and make that recommendation if that's what you believe.
If I might, there's no question that's critical. The question is, when does it become critical, and why are we stepping outside the normal processes of the subdivision ordinance in order to do that? How well has that worked in the last 25 years? I mean, I've been part of that property for 25 years. I've seen them die on the vine because of this very imposition of over and above the subdivision ordinance. So I guess, and maybe I'm speaking to the city council here, how many tax dollars did you lose over the last 25 years? The commercial property and the RP are going to need that street. So there's no reason to do this leverage thing that keeps reoccurring every time. But I guess legal counsel was supposed to be here. I'm not sure where they're at, but I would just ask that you consider that we stay within the normal processes of platting and guaranteeing the infrastructure for those lots that you create. And there again, we put in the developmental procedures agreement that should the connection come up from the south, then there's 4 years and then we have to complete it. Other than that, there's really no reason to leverage what will end up being a dead-end road unless it comes from the south. So
To clarify, the critical infrastructure piece is a fairly new requirement.
Right, so the
Correct.
subdivision code has been amended because of this very issue. That's now a part of the subdivision code that the city has a purview to determine whether the phasing plan is adequate to ensure the extension of critical infrastructure.
We have another speaker. Your name and address, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Wenland, an attorney at Clark Butler Walsh and Hayman, 315 East 5th Street, Waterloo. Here to support the applicant tonight. And although I'm an attorney, I don't plan to use a lot of words here because Wendell's already expressed most of what I wanted to say. But I think what needs to be understood here is the surrounding context in which this decision needs to be made by the commission as well as by the city council. Because although the applicant, as expressed by Mr. Lupkus tonight, is not insistent necessarily that the 1974 agreement, the 1994 agreement, and other expressions done by the city council through formal action over the course of many years committed themselves to handling the build-out of this street in a certain way. The developer is nonetheless willing to work with the city on a compromise basis by saying, let's look at the subdivision ordinance because that provides a very clear pathway about which there are no legal entanglements for how we can sort out the question of dealing with this aspect of infrastructure, which seems to be generally acknowledged as critical at some point in the near future. But the reason the developer can say that is because the city's feet are a bit to the fire on this question. Those agreements represent binding contractual commitments of the city of Cedar Falls going back as far as 1974. Now, from a practical standpoint, a government regulation standpoint, I can understand why the city wants to go with more recent operating procedure and new standards and how we look at these things. But the fact of the matter is, the city's adopting new procedures, new guidelines, even a new ordinance cannot trump the contractual commitments that it made, bound itself to in the past. The simple fact of the matter is that since 1974, if the city at any time since then has thought that this truly is critical infrastructure, it has had the legal contractual means to make sure that that infrastructure is put into place. Okay? It's been there since '74. All the city has to do is say, dedicate the land to us, we'll put in the street, we'll assess half the cost to the property owner. For reasons political, financial, or otherwise, the city has chosen not to do that. Okay, but the fact is those agreements remain in place. The developer can insist that that's what the city must do. Whether it's critical infrastructure or not, the city's hands are tied. The developer doesn't want to be a jerk about this. They're willing to work with the city, but let's do it in the context of the proper place as established by the ordinance for subdivision platting. Because there's clear language in the subdivision planning ordinance that we can address critical infrastructure issues at that time. We can address connections that need to be made and all manner of things relating to flow of traffic and needs of the neighborhood and those kinds of issues. So I would respectfully say it is not within the purview of this commission to say, well, it doesn't matter what the city council bound itself to years ago. It doesn't matter that the mayor and the city council signed agreements after approval by the city council. The fact is, you folks work within the context of an ordinance, but the city's hands are tied. The city loses nothing by approving this rezoning or the amendment to the land use map, because the ordinance already provides a pathway and a context in which this conversation can occur before platting is approved. And as the city has already acknowledged, the plans here, I think in staff's terms tonight, was speculative. Okay, it's broadly conceptual. There's a lot here that's not known except that this land has value. It has strong development potential. Well, as Mr. Luck has pointed out, there have been many projects brought to this city over the many years, decades, that, as he put it, died on the vine because the city wants to impose a lot of requirements at a conceptual stage. Let's not do that. Let's give this project a chance to move forward, at least to the next step, so that the developer can have further relevant conversation with the city as plans concretize and become more clear, and then we can decide what's the phasing, how should this street infrastructure be put in, and who ought to pay for it. Thank you.
Clarifying question, do we have a legal opinion from city
So
staff?
I just would say that we have no legal counsel here tonight to address those previous agreements and whether their characterization here is accurate. What we do have tonight here is a request for rezoning action. So with any rezoning action, this is not, they have no rights to develop it as they're proposing today without this rezoning action. At the time of a rezoning action, it's a legislative action, and reasonable conditions can be applied to any rezoning action that are related to the development of the property. So that is what's being asked of the commission tonight, is whether to rezone the property, and not a quasi-judicial decision here about a planning exercise that is going to be in the future. I would caution the commission that we don't have city attorney counsel here tonight. The city attorney hasn't recently reviewed any past agreements, and I would just also note that none of the development that those agreements were based on has ever occurred. So it's never been realized. So whether or not those agreements are still in force is a question that's still out there.
All right, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this item? Seeing or hearing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion.
I believe it's a reasonable request by the applicant, and looking at all of the items that we have looked at, he agrees that the street is critical infrastructure in the future, and I would move to approve the land use and rezoning change as requested.
And I would second that.
So we have a motion and second for approval. Discussion about that?
So just to clarify, we're just, the debate is the timing of when that street is going in and what triggers that timing of when it's put in.
So staff is recommending approval subject to one of the three options for extending the road, an agreement that would include one of those three options. So that's our recommendation. So the commission needs to clarify what your recommendation is going to be.
My recommendation does not include those three options. My motion to approve does not include those three options.
Can you state your recommendation, Leanne?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, could you restate your recommendation then? What is the recommendation?
I move to approve the land use change and the rezoning change as requested by the applicant, not subject to the three options that were presented for the street.
So are you saying that the road is not critical, then no extension of the street, or what is the?
No, that can happen later. It doesn't have to be in this agreement to change the rezoning and the land use map, according to what I just heard. That can be done later with your development agreement, right?
Yeah, can you clarify that, Karen? I think there's some confusion about
I think
the road and the future of that. That is tied to this rezoning, correct?
right. So the commission, I guess the purview of the commission would be whether or not that road should be a part of the agreement. The extension of the road, should it be a part of the agreement to ensure the extension of the road to the south property?
I thought we were looking at rezoning,
Right, but.
not an extension of a road.
Right.
Right, but this is a planned development, so the request here is to approve a planned development that includes all of these elements in a planned development, right? It's PC2, which includes a number of different things that are included as a requirement of rezoning to PC2. So that's why we're discussing all of these various elements, including the streets and the lots, because that needs to be laid out in a master plan. And part of that is the extension of the infrastructure.
I feel like we have future opportunities for this to come up during plating, especially in either Phase 2 or the residential area to the west, or as the applicant proposed, development on the Clark ground to the south. I think that's a pretty reasonable idea. But I can't say that, especially in looking at Phase 1, that I feel like the road connection all the way to a dead end is critical at this point in time. And if there are opportunities to discuss it more later as the project evolves, I would support Leanne's motion based on that for getting the wheels rolling, so to speak.
It's a classic kind of discussion about what we do now and how it happens later, right? Do you do a piece now in the hopes that it happens later, or do you do nothing now and then have gaps later, right? We certainly have more control now than we will later. Are there ways? I mean, it seems to me that the developer has the right thing in mind, is that they want that road to happen. So can we build, is there a mechanism to building some assurances that this happens in some way that it isn't defined now as part of this over a certain time period? I mean, if they agree that it needs to happen and the city wants it to happen, aren't there ways for that to be worked out later while also providing some assurances?
Well, in the developmental procedures agreement that was proposed, we're talking about 4 years with development to the south, or with either a second phase or the residential area to the west, as I understood it. With any of those three things, I think critical is a little more fair assessment of that extension with any of those three.
I guess my question is, do we want some assurances? If everyone agrees that it's going to happen, why can't there be some assurances built in? I think our public is closed at this point.
I just have a question about how the new ordinance interacts with previous agreements, and if we can get clarification before we make any votes.
Did you hear
The new
that?
ordinance subdivision. So this will have to be brought back for subdivision plating, and I guess the same question will come up again. I think maybe one solution here is, if the commission believes that it's a critical piece of infrastructure, you could make a motion to approve the rezoning, subject to an agreement for extension of Lake Ridge Drive to the south property boundary that is acceptable to the city council. Something like that, so that it's then negotiated between the P&Z and, because ultimately it's, the council that would be approving the agreement.
Seems like a reasonable request to me personally, but
It still would be a dead-end road.
Well, just every subdivision that comes in the city, or they're extending their streets to their property boundaries until the next development comes along. I mean, that's what happens all over the city. And so whichever one comes first, they're extending their streets to the property boundary, and then the next development comes along and they take that street from that point and they continue it to theirs. So that is a requirement of our subdivision code, to extend the streets to the property boundaries. Just like you extend all the infrastructure to the property boundaries, the sewer, the water, so that the next guy can pick it up and extend it further.
The difference here is when it happens. I don't believe it's not going to happen. The question is, you want to be assured when it's going to happen. But on the other hand, the developer has the expense.
So I think
And,
we kind of,
So, I mean, we have to take that into consideration too. I don't want anything to keep this development from going forward. We need it in our city, and I don't see that they're not going to put the street in or the road in. So, I mean,
it's Seems to me, just trying to clarify and summarize this, we have an option that, that's to approve this as submitted. And then we have kind of a second option that kind of ties some assurances to the completion of the road. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion on the first version of that, which is to approve as stated? If not, I would suggest a roll call vote.
Okay. Are we, any other? Hartley?
Aye.
So which one are we voting on?
Okay,
We got the motion on the table of Leanne's motion.
Leanne's motion on the table is to approve as submitted.
Lynch?
Correct? Hold on.
Her motion was to approve the rezoning without the three options.
Right.
Which is to
And that
approve
was my
as,
Which is
Without
submitted,
any
yeah.
assurance for the road.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
Without any assurance for the road.
Correct.
Leanne, I just want to make sure we're characterizing this correctly. So you're recommending approval as proposed by the developer, which has a phasing plan that just includes the 2 lots in the second phase.
Right.
Okay. So
And that was my second also.
as the phasing plan is currently proposed.
Right.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
All right, let's start over here. Hartley,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Leeper,
Nay.
Lynch,
Nay.
Prideaux,
Nay.
Saul,
Aye.
Schrod,
Aye.
Sears.
Aye.
All right, so that item passes
Okay.
and moves on to council. All right, we're at a blistering pace for item number 2, old business. Second item, old business, is rezoning from M4 Multiple Residence District to C2 at 515 West 2nd Street. And Michelle, I think you're,
I'm going to hand this over to Karen today.
okay?
In the interest of time, we've presented this, Michelle has presented this twice. At the last hearing, the applicant requested the hearing be extended to this meeting. They said they were preparing some materials for the meeting. They came with the materials right before the meeting, so we handed those out to you. Staff has not had any chance to really look at the materials that they handed out. Just to remind you, the rezoning request is to rezone the property from R4 to C2. And this rezoning request, is it consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan? You can see here the comprehensive plan that was recently adopted with the downtown vision plan. So staff has looked at this and said this is not consistent with the downtown vision plan that was adopted in 2019. Another thing to note is the downtown character district zoning that was recently recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission on May 12th to the City Council. The City Council voted last night to approve P&Z's recommendation on the first reading of the ordinances. And I just wanted to point out in this slide, you can see the current zoning boundaries in black, and that's the difference between, you can see the C2 zoning is on the north side of that black line. South of that black line is R4 currently, with the proposed zoning that's being considered at council on P&Z's recommendation. You can see that zoning boundary is going to shift to the south so that there's more area in that urban general, which is that mixed use, the higher intensity zone, that will create more depth of that lot between 1st and 2nd Street with the new zoning. So I just wanted to make that clear because we talked about it last time, but this is a little more clear demonstration of what that would do with the new zoning that's at City Council right now. This is just a view of the whole corridor and the current zoning boundary between residential along 2nd Street currently and the commercial along 1st Street, looking at You can see that the corridor is primarily residential in character along Second Street, with the commercial zoning and the commercial businesses that have formed over the years on the north half of those blocks. Staff recommends denial of this case, a request to rezone properties at 515 West 2nd Street and 523 West 2nd Street from R4 to C2 because the request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, that is the adopted Imagine Downtown Vision Plan. Staff also notes that the subject request for rezoning is counter to Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended draft of the Downtown Character District Code and the Commission's recommendation to approve the rezoning of the subject property to CDTT. That's the City Council, as I noted, heard that matter last night, so they took the first reading on those two recommendations of the Commission.
All right, thank you, Karen. Any questions for staff before we go to the public? All right, before we go to the public, anyone from the applicant that would like to speak to this item? Name and address, please.
Jim Benda, 1816 Valley High Drive, Cedar Falls. The applicant could not be here tonight. We knew that when we had to move our meeting, so we apologize for that. We'll also apologize that we got this site plan to you very late. And we would appreciate any consideration, but obviously it's unfair to put this before you now and ask you to vote on something like this on a short basis like that. So we would ask for your patience if you decide to put us off for an extra meeting or something. We understand. I don't have the ability, I guess, from this to show a diagram, or can I do that from here?
We don't have any digital file of what you've brought us right before the meeting.
Okay, and that's the only way we can do things as far as presentation. Anyway, on the site plan that we gave you here shortly, you'll notice on it that our property that we're asking to be rezoned, along with the car wash on First Street, is bordered by Iowa Street to the west, First Street to the north, a paved alley on the east side, and then Second Street. And we heard a lot of voices talking to us about setback and a lot about screening. And so what we've added here along Second Street, inside the building setback, is a row of hedges and shrubs for screening. We put the parking to the back and to the west side. If you'll notice, along the front sidewalk on the front First Street side, we've added a covered patio for walking guests and a bike rack for biking guests. We tried to consider the best traffic pattern that would allow for the least amount of traffic onto Second Street in the way this was designed. I don't have a rendering of the building. I think before we would get to something like that, I think the applicant would just like to know that they have an opportunity that maybe this could get built before they do renderings, things like that. But I would certainly take any questions. We took pictures of all the screening in the corridors for the properties that have all run from First to Second Street. There's a number of examples, some being school buildings, one being the State Patrol. None of those buildings have screenings on them now. McDonald's has some screening, namely a fence, but it's adjacent to single-family homes. In this case, our proposal would have a street that boundaries the whole property in addition to an alley. So there's no residential uses right up against it. We would use Second Street as a natural barrier, transition from commercial to residential. I know this is not inconsistent, or that is not consistent with the vision plan, but I've repeatedly said that I think there are some areas of that vision plan that do not make sense, namely the commercial spaces and the amount of parking that those will require. We're trying to put the parking stalls on the site and trying to screen it where it looks to us that if the vision plan gets adopted the way it is, that those cars, if they're successful businesses, will end up on Second Street or Tremont Street or Iowa Street, which is where no one wants them. Same thing will happen with the townhomes that are planned for two bedroom units Those folks will often have 2 cars plus a teenager at home or a college student that also has a car or 2, and those cars will also end up on 2nd Street, Iowa Street, or Tremont Street. I'd be glad to answer any questions. Again, I apologize that it's short notice, and we would certainly understand if you'd ask if we could put this off for another meeting.
I do have a question. One of the things that we're looking at is rezoning, but there is no guarantee that it'll be a Wendy's.
Understand, and I appreciate your question. One of the things that I think you should also look at is the amount of green space that a higher zoning in this location would allow. If you look at the amount of green space that's across the river or on this side of the river, when you add in Overman Park, Sturgis Park, all of those parks, it's an amazing amount of green space. The higher zoning would actually give you the opportunity for future higher densities. It doesn't mean that it has to happen, doesn't mean that it would happen anytime soon, but allowing the higher use would actually give you opportunity to increase densities in the future where there is more green space and it is still walkable to the downtown and to the parks. Many times that's one of the criteria for doing higher densities is what's the amount of green space.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Yes, I have one. What consideration has been given for a project like this one based on the way the new zoning ordinance that we're on the cusp of being adopted?
We were trying very hard to accommodate what their goal is, and that's to create a buffer between what they would consider residential on the south side of First Street or on the north side of Second Street. We tried to purposely leave the last, I can't even give you a dimension on it, but I think it's the last 20 or 30 feet there as green space and parking with a row of hedges across Second Street. If somebody would prefer something else in there, we're certainly willing to listen, but we believe trees are probably the natural best barrier for that.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this item? Nobody online?
No one online.
Okay. With that, I bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Well, I think this looks like a good project, and we've talked in the past about some holes in the logic on some of these fringe areas. At least I know I have. I also feel like it would be a little bit of an overstep to change the rules right after we recommended the new zoning ordinance. So this might be a staff question, if we're able to make kind of an exception and pass this one along to council, but without a recommendation, seeking guidance on evaluating some of these specific areas, particularly in this character district and where that line is drawn, and maybe using this as an example. Or if that's even the correct avenue for exploring it further without leaving it as a dead end, because I have some mixed feelings about it, however you look at it.
Are you saying defer this basically to council?
Yeah, are we able to do that?
So the question that the case that's before you is a request for rezoning from R4 to C2. So you need to make a decision on that request. So the other thing that you're speculating on is changing, if I'm summarizing this correctly, are you suggesting that the new zoning that's being proposed be considered for changing that new zoning to something different than what's currently under consideration at council?
Not without holding it up necessarily, but if council's looking at it right now, and if any of us, if I'm not alone here and having some mixed feelings on how it gets applied in real-world practice, I feel like it'd be more appropriate for them to consider, for council to consider that, given the timing of it, than it would be for us right now to kind of take steps backwards. I guess that's kind of where I'm going with that. Like, I think this raises some real issues or concerns, and could stand in the way of what, on the surface, feels like a pretty good project. But like I said, I don't think we can try and change the rules based on the timing right now. I think it's something that they should consider, and then if council were to determine that it makes sense to, examine a couple of areas or a couple of conditions more closely, maybe that's something where we get the consultant team to chime in on and maybe reevaluate a piece of it.
So just to clarify, that is not something that's on the agenda tonight. There was no public notice of that being on the agenda tonight, so you couldn't really, you can pose that as a question, but that would have to be actually something official that's on your agenda for consideration.
Okay. What would be our vehicle to do that then?
I don't, you have a recommendation on the table at the city council right now. So the city council would have to make the motion to change what's being suggested and send it back to the commission, I guess, just off the top of my head. If somebody on the council were to make a request for a change to your recommendation on the zoning that you've recommended, they could send it back to the commission for reconsideration. That would
How
probably
would
be the
the
vehicle to do that.
P&Z do that? We don't have the ability to ask the council to restructure something that we've already
Right,
approved.
so it would have to be the applicant, somebody from the public that would be asking the council that question.
So would it be, I'm sorry, so would it be possible for the applicant to ask that boundary change, the current boundary? Because right now we're accommodating, or that boundary would change, right? So the applicant could ask for that.
Right, and the applicant can certainly talk to me about that process, but what you have on the agenda tonight, you need to keep with the agenda that you have. So we shouldn't really be speculating or talking about things that are not on the agenda for consideration. So you can do a number of different things. You can table this rezoning request. You could or you could vote on it. If you vote on it, we would probably not have it put on the agenda until the time that the council is making their final determination on the zoning that's before them, because any decision on that is going to make this particular zoning request moot.
So what would happen then is if we approve this, the city council would have to wait until they've approved the original concept before they can make a recommendation on this?
No, if you recommended approval tonight on this particular rezoning, if the council approves the zoning that's before them right now, this particular request would become moot because there would no longer be R4 or C2.
I guess we just went through an extensive process with the public, talking to hundreds of people, asking for their opinions about what the future of our city should be and how it should be developed. And for the first project out of the gate, to change all that seems suspect to me. I would argue that the project, I love the project. I think it'd be great. I'm thinking about Frosties right now. But the project needs more land because of its lack of density,
Right.
which is a primary goal of the vision plan. So there are other kinds of development. This is a very suburban kind of development, and I think it's a great project. I don't want to hold things up, but it's not consistent with the vision that that this community is set, and I guess as a commissioner, I don't feel comfortable changing it on the first one here.
As I stated earlier, though, a lot of times when you put these things together, you really don't know what the future is going to bring. And quite honestly, because I go down First Street 50 times a day, First Street is going to become the next arterial commercial area for the city of Cedar Falls. And all the way out to Union Road. It's going to be that part. So, I look at it and say, I love the idea, but we don't know what the future brings. And we can sit here for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and during that same time, the future can change 3 or 4 times. So I think what needs to happen with this is I think it really needs to be reviewed, not by us, but I think before the city council goes through their second and third readings on this, they should look at it. That's my feeling.
Then I would make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Sure. I second.
It's a motion and a second. Discussion.
I'm sorry, guys, I'm having problems with my sound, so I'm losing like 30 seconds of each, but I believe I caught Mr. Leeper in his perspective. I would completely agree that this is not, we need to protect the integrity of that neighborhood. We need to honor the vision plan. We need to honor the future land use. So I would vote to, or I'll vote to against that.
Any other discussion?
Well, I think she said it the right way, that if we approve this and the city council goes through with their second and third readings, this becomes a moot point and has to come back again. Is that correct? Have
A
to be
different request would have to be submitted.
That's what I'm asking. Yes, it would
Yes.
have to be resubmitted, correct? If we
Yes,
approve
a
it
different
and the
request would
city
need to
council.
be submitted. It would have to be another rezoning request to amend the zoning that's under
Correct.
consideration right now.
Okay.
This proposal as submitted, does it include an update to the future land use map?
An update to the future land use map would be necessary, and that would be a change to the downtown vision plan. And so that's, consistent with our pattern with all these rezonings. We do any changes to the comp plan necessary before we can approve rezoning.
Are we able to recommend a rezoning if it's in violation of the plan, or do we need to would we need to amend the motion to include amending the plan as well?
It is counter to the approval criteria for a rezoning to approve a rezoning that's counter to the comprehensive plan. So yes, you would need to recommend making a change to the comprehensive plan in order to approve this particular rezoning.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second on the table to approve this as submitted.
But it technically, no matter which way it gets voted, it's not really going to go anywhere until we know if the vision plan is approved as is.
So the vision plan, I just want to make sure we're clear here. The vision plan was approved in 2019. That is the comprehensive plan for this area. The zoning is now under consideration. The zoning code, as you know, and the zoning map were prepared in order to implement the vision plan. And that's what's under consideration at council right now.
Okay.
All right, if there's no other further discussion, we have a motion and a second to approve as stated. Roll call vote.
Okay. Hartley,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Leeper,
Nay.
Lynch,
Nay.
Prideaux,
Nay.
Saul,
Aye.
Schrod, Sears.
Nay.
That fails on a tie vote.
The next item on the agenda is a land use map amendment for Cedar Heights Drive and Valley High Drive.
I'm going
Chris,
to
I
recuse
think you're-
myself from this item. Mr. Leeper?
Oh, okay. Chris, you're going to kick us off?
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. We have an application for a rezone of 6.38 acres on the northwest corner of the intersection at Cedar Heights Drive and Valley High Drive, shown by a star on the graphic. The applicant is requesting that the subject property be rezoned from C1 commercial to an RP planned residence district. At the site, the applicant would like to build 6 12-plex units. This request also involves an amendment to a larger area of 12.5 acres of the future land use map. We're bringing this forward tonight for a public hearing. On the current land use map, this entire area is designated as office and business park, as shown in pink. This use is more prevalent to the north of these parcels with a dental office, a credit union, and an educational office. All of the properties that we propose to amend either have been developed or are proposed to be developed as medium density residential. So the area's shaded in orange. Principles of land use planning would concentrate commercial uses and nodes that are appropriately sized. Staff finds that the amount of commercial and office indicated on the future land use map along this corridor may be excessive given the lower traffic volume and more attractive locations for such development in other areas of the city. Also, additional residential development will provide needed housing in the community to help create more demand for nearby retail and commercial services. So with this request to update the land use map for the property indicated by the star, we think it will be appropriate to change the area in question to medium density residential as shown on the graphic in the presentation. Before we get to the staff recommendation, I will delve into the rezone. As already discussed, the applicant is seeking to build 6 12-plex units on the 6.38 acre property at the northwest corner of Cedar Heights and Valley High, highlighted in yellow. The height and number of stories of the desired buildings would not be allowed in the C1 commercial district. The proposed rezone is to the RP planned residence district, and there are 3 primary criteria for a rezone. The first is consistency with the future land use map, which we have already discussed. The others have to do with access to streets and city services. These criteria are met, assuming that the land use map amendment goes through. Included in the packet were some documents that several individuals requested to be provided to the commission. These include a letter from the Legacy HOA attorney, a petition that was signed by residents of that HOA back in May of 2020, and a memo from the developer that explains the concessions that are being made by the developer for the benefit of the HOA to address each of the concerns. Here on the current slide are the concerns and the primary ways in which those will be addressed. It should be noted that since these concessions have been made and discussed in neighborhood meetings, the petition may not accurately represent the current sentiment of all who signed it 14 months back. As an example, Lloyd Peterson, who submitted public comment generally in support of the project, had originally signed the petition. That said, these up on the slide are the 4 major concerns brought up by members of the HOA. And to the right are the resolutions that are being proposed or will be required as part of the site plan review. I will explain these more in depth, the line of sight issues, light pollution. As you can see here, lights will be required to be downcast and shielded during site plan review. We do require a photometric plan to be reviewed. The following are some reasons why staff believes a medium density residential development here is a better fit than a commercial or office use. This property borders residential uses on 3 sides, and the rezone to RP would provide assurance to the existing residents of how this land will be developed. The C1 district does not require mandatory review by the Planning and Zoning Commission nor City Council, and has a broad list of uses such as gas stations, restaurants, grocery stores, etc., that could go there otherwise with little or no input from neighbors. City staff finds that the RP district is appropriate and ensures that neighborhood concerns can be considered in this process. This will be shown better on a later slide, but the proposed setbacks are far less imposing than what could otherwise go there under the C1 district rules. Based on discussions we have had with the applicant, some conditions of this rezone should include only 2 access points to be allowed off of Cedar Heights Drive. That doesn't preclude an access point coming off of Valley High, but the one is not proposed currently by the applicant. A code-compliant landscape plan will be required prior to site plan approval. Screening of the parking area will be required and will be reviewed when the applicant seeks the building permit. Current submitted plans show a 3.5 to 6 foot berm with vegetation on top. The height of the screening will be required by code to total 6 feet minimum. The graphic on the current slide was provided by the applicant to neighbors in a good neighbor meeting to illustrate a best effort to address the line of sight issues. Assuming a berm plus vegetation plus overstory trees, not to mention an existing line of trees in the rear yards of the neighboring HOA, clear lines of sight appear to be more than adequately addressed. Just to give some perspective from staff's analysis, the box in blue now appearing on the screen illustrates what could be allowed in the C1 district. An office building or grocery store could be 35 feet tall, not that they are usually 35 feet tall, but they can be as close as 10 feet to the property line. Again, with no mandatory review by the Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council. And there is no requirement in the code to screen between C1 zoned properties, which is the current zoning of both properties. What is being proposed will have the residential buildings sit more than 150 feet from the property line, which is quite a distance. As far as the stormwater issue, here's a picture example of what happens during major stormwater events in the rear yards of the neighboring HOA to the west. We do not know all of the sources of this flooding, but stormwater management will be required as part of site plan review. And it can only be improved to the extent that it is coming from the property in question. As shown on the right, the applicant is proposing several stormwater basins bordering Cedar Heights Drive, and water will be directed eastward toward those basins. This will be required to release water off the property at a significantly reduced rate compared to an undeveloped site. Since sufficient responsibility for stormwater will be placed on the developer at the site planning phase of the project, staff finds that it is not necessary to impose a condition of the rezone in relation to stormwater. Now for recommendations, this requires 2 votes of the commission. Staff recommends approval of the land use, the amendment of the future land use map from office and business park to medium density residential as illustrated in the staff report. Staff also recommends approval of the request to rezone the northwest corner of Cedar Heights Drive and Valley High Drive from C1 to RP, subject to conditions outlined in the staff report and as discussed here. And with that, I turn it over to the commission to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Any questions for staff? All right, is there anyone from the applicant that would like to speak to this item? Name and address, please.
Dan Levi, Levi Architecture, 1009 Technology Parkway. Staff did a pretty good job of characterizing the project. I feel like I've got a pretty easy job tonight. opportunity to develop this land for commercial use has gone by the wayside for many years. The development of this, rezone of this, and then development in a medium density residential is going to allow the adjacent property owners and the city to actually have some say, as was clearly delineated by staff, as to how we screen, where the buildings sit, what we can do with noise and sound pollution, all of those factors that were addressed in the original petition that was 14 months ago. And those issues were legitimate and real, and the client and developer has addressed those issues to the best of his ability over the last few months, and we have made design changes in concert with not only those suggestions, but also that of the city. A little bit of history about the developer is a residential custom, high-end custom residential developer. These condos will be similar in nature. One of the changes that they made as part of the pro forma is that these will be owner occupied. These will not be rental units, and there'll be stipulations in all of the ownership agreements as to the number of applicants not of the same household, things of that nature. The developer is not interested in building apartments. These are condos that are meant to be sold to individuals that want to live there. We've made specific changes to the overall design, including removing the curb cut to the south, only having curb cuts directly onto Cedar Heights, rearranging the detention areas, so rather than one large one in the very southeast corner, we would have several smaller ones. So as the developer develops the entire parcel in phases, that we can make sure that we are accommodating those water issues as required by law as we go. And then the large screen in the back, the berm, rather than just vegetation, is designed entirely to make sure that at no point, whether it's winter or summer, depending on the depth of the foliage, that there will be no headlights that can exit the property to the east. It'll be tall enough to accommodate all of those lights. And from the site sketch that staff had shown earlier, the building is tall, 3-story, but it sets 200 feet away from the rear door of any of the properties to the west. So that's nearly a football field away. There are garages that are a little closer, but again, those are 1-story, standard garage. So we've put all of the properties far forward as possible to alleviate any unsightly sight lines for those few properties that are adjacent to the west.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, Dan. All right, with that, we'll open up. Comment. Are you part of the applicant or public?
Opposed.
Okay.
Okay, Richard Pint is my name. I'm a resident of the condo association there on Orchard Hill on Legacy Lane. My question is, do you know, is Menards going to be building these condos? Does anyone know? Minard? Okay.
He will
Okay,
not.
ours were all built by Minard, and so I'm just a little down on him because how cheaply made they were. They're very cheaply made. So my comment is, I wish the builder would find another builder to build these condos. That's
Okay.
my comment.
Thank you. A reminder to everyone, because we had this confused a little bit last time, and there's a lot of people interested in this topic. The item on the table tonight is whether the rezoning is appropriate, going from a C1 to an RP. So it's actually more restrictive than it exists today. So there will be an opportunity to talk about specifics of the project at a later phase. Tonight is really purely about the zoning. You can come up and talk about whatever you want, but tonight we're really voting on the zoning. So is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to. My name is Brian Page, 3325 Waterbury Drive. For those of you who might not know who I am, I'm a broker at Oak Ridge Real Estate.
Can you lift the microphone up? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So, would you like me to go back again? Brian Page, 3325 Waterbury. I'm a broker at Oak Ridge Real Estate. I don't necessarily have a dog in the fight on this deal, but when I see an opportunity for our community to take advantage of something that seems, in my mind, as a real estate practitioner, such an obvious use of the land to rezone for a product that we don't have. I can't tell you, I'm just from personal experience, I can't tell you how many times I've done a community tour for UNI, for John Deere, had maybe a single professor candidate in my car and then say, you know, what do you think they're going to ask me? Where am I going to live in Cedar Falls and can I afford to live here? We have an incredible demand for affordable housing in Cedar Falls. And when I say that new construction, I mean condo lifestyle living. I don't mean cookie cutter, Menards built stuff from the cheap stuff. I'm talking about the kind of place where it's exciting. You can come in and make a selection. You can carve it out the way you want to do it, and it's going to be a positive experience. As a realtor, as a guy that's been practicing for about 22 years now, I was around for some of the Legacy Lane stuff. I remember that. There's always been growing pains with a new development, especially contiguous to undeveloped land. And we remember when that happened. I've sold a lot of those properties myself. I have clients that live there. And I could assure you as a realtor in this community, when it comes down to making a good community investment into something that has a win-win on every side of it, and in my mind could only improve the property around it and elevate the value, it becomes kind of a no-brainer. And I hate to use that word, but I don't come down here very much. You guys do a wonderful job. We trust in what you do and how you do everything. But when I see something that maybe can come at it from a slightly different angle, a perspective, I can tell you that we've lost great people that could be living in our community because I couldn't find them a place that fit the grid, that was cost effective, the kind of people that we want to have at the university. Those are stories. That's not every story, but I can tell you, and I wish I could have got it soon enough today. At my company, we have a Tuesday sales meeting, and we do what's called an absorption study. And I can tell you right now in the city of Cedar Falls, between $200,000 and $219,000, which may be a target price point for some of these properties, there's one active listing in town. Now, I think we all know that there's a shortage of listings in inventory in Cedar Falls. But, you know, if there's a concern of a project fill out, can we do this? Is it going to be something that could fill out over a course of a reasonable period of time? I don't have any fears about that. This isn't a self-serving mission. I would like to be able to find clients places to live. And the last thing I would want to do would jeopardize a position of a previous client adjacent to that property. And so, in good faith, I just felt like I really wanted to come down here and just my sincerity on this is a good use for this property. There could be a lot of different things that could happen here, but it's an exciting property. It's something we don't have, and I know we can do it. So, and I would take any question from anybody that might, since you have a realtor standing in the room. So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Is anyone else from the public that would like to speak to this item? State your name and address.
Good evening, Steve Umthun. My address is 4102, Unit 4, Legacy Lane in Cedar Falls. I'm going to repeat again what I said last time. I want to thank all of you for the work that you do, your volunteer efforts. The packet that went out was 138 pages or something like that, and it's incredible the amount of work that goes into digesting that and making decisions for the betterment of Cedar Falls. So I just tip my hats off and say thanks for your volunteer work in doing this. I wanted to just clarify, I did speak the last time, and there was some confusion as to exactly the role or the purpose, for that last meeting. So I just wanted to ask, and you can probably answer pretty quick, there will be opportunities for a site plan approval process or input at a later date, because specifically this is dealing only with the rezoning. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to get clear on that. I'm not going to tie things up anymore. I appreciate your listening to us, and thank you very much for your work.
Thank you, Steve. Is anyone else from the public that would like to speak to the item tonight? Name and address, please.
Yeah, St. John Lane in the last 2 weeks, 3909 Legacy Lane. I think in fairness to Chris, He did a phenomenal job tonight, and I think he answered probably 90% of my questions. I don't want to be redundant, although I see a couple new faces on your board tonight, so they didn't hear what we suggested 2 weeks ago. My only couple concerns. Am I dealing with LGC if we have failures, or am I dealing with Heartland Development? Who does the attorney go after? That's my concern.
To be clear about the, sorry.
Yeah.
The Heartland Development is the seller of the property. LGC is the applicant for this project and would be the builder for this project.
So paper-wise, it will be sold before LGC starts to build, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The other request that we would like as owners, because I truly think the majority of my 115 signatures on the petition have changed their mind and are in favor of what LGC has proposed. And he's been very generous with offering the water mitigation issue, so I think we'll work closely with him. I do want some legal assurances that if he doesn't do it, I've got someone to go after. This is a big project for him, very costly. I don't want the backyards of, you saw the water, torn up for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years with track hose trying to do a drain tile for us. So I would really push that that's done soon, the berm is done soon, the foliage is done soon. Like I said 2 weeks ago, I'm not going to live long enough to stand there and not see a 42-foot building over in my front yard. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else from the public? Anyone online?
We do have one online. Jubal Sloan.
Jubal, I think you're on.
I have to allow to mute. Sorry about that. There we go.
Yes, can you hear me?
Speak up, it's pretty soft.
Okay, I'll see if I can make my microphone louder. How about now? Did that help?
That's better.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jubal Sloan, and I'm the HOA president of the Valley High Condo Association. And Mr. Lane spoke just now, and I echo all of his sentiments. I think this is a very good change. I think this is, I think we've seen a tremendous amount of goodwill, and I think this is an excellent use of the property. Obviously, all of us would like a nice, quiet feel next to our houses, but we always knew it was going to get developed, and I think this situation, as it's been panning out, is about as ideal as it's going to get. So I just want to say that I think this is the right call, and I really hope this moves forward.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak to the item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for comments and/or a motion.
Well, I would agree, it's a great project for the area. I've seen that sit there quite a while. So I would recommend that we approve the change of the land use map and the zoning.
I would second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I agree that it's a great project potential, and to be able to have something that makes it just a better place to live here in Cedar Falls, I think is the right move for us moving forward.
All right. With that, let's do a roll call vote.
Hartley?
Aye.
Larson? Well, he's abstaining, obviously. Leeper?
Aye.
Lynch?
Aye.
Prideaux?
Aye.
Saul?
Aye.
Schrod?
Aye.
Sears?
Aye.
All right, so that item passes and move along to council. Thank you for all your public input. Our next item on, we're going to new business is the CBD overlay design review for 215 Main Street. And Michelle?
Thank you, Chairperson Lieberner. I just have a quick overview. The project that is being proposed is at 215 Main Street, and it is closer to 3rd Street than 2nd Street along Main. And the sidewalk is actually at the largest spot at this location. And the applicant is proposing a black fabric awning that will be 8 feet above the sidewalk as required, and it can go up to 5 feet. They're proposing a 2-foot wide awning that would go over the sidewalk. And staff finds that the proposal meets the criteria as outlined in the code and recommends approval. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. Is there anyone from the applicant that would like to speak to the item? Seeing none, anyone from the public that would like to speak to this item? With that, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and or motion.
I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? My only discussion would be, can we stop these things from coming to planning and zoning?
As soon as the new code passes.
You don't have to answer that, but roll call vote, please.
Hartley.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Leeper.
Aye.
Lynch.
Aye.
Prideaux.
Aye.
Saul.
Aye.
Schrod.
Aye.
Sears.
Aye.
All right, thank you. That item moves on to City Council. Item number 6 on our new business is a minor plat for lots 18, 19, 20 of the Sands Edition. And I think Chris, back to you, Chris.
Yes, thank you. So the property owner of these lots, 18, 19, and 20 of the Sands Edition, also known as 4224, 4232, and 4302 James Drive, proposes to re-subdivide the 3 parcels into 2 larger parcels divided down the center of lot 19. For reference, these parcels sit between Highway 58 and Main, just north of Green Hill, and they were created in 2019. Since this eliminates 1 parcel and creates 2 larger parcels, a minor plat is required. These are located in the R1 Residence District. The drawing up on the screen graphically depicts how the 3 parcels would be converted to 2. The building setbacks in the R1 district require a 30-foot front yard setback, which is already platted and will remain, and a 30-foot rear yard setback, also platted and will remain, as indicated on the minor plat document. The side yard areas are 10% of the lot width. All existing platted easements are carried over to this plat. Specifically, the 10-foot utility easement along the street frontage to the west is to remain, and the 10-foot utility or access easement along the northern portion is to remain. The full minor plat exhibit was included in the packet, and we bring this forward for discussion. And if there are no concerns by the commission, staff recommends approval of this minor plat.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anyone from the applicant who would like to speak to the item? Anyone from the public?
Nothing online?
With that, we'll bring it back to the commission for motion or discussion.
Looks pretty straightforward. I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the item? Hearing none, let's have a roll call vote.
Hartley.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Leeper.
Aye.
Lynch.
Aye.
Prideaux.
Aye.
Saul.
Aye.
Schrod.
Aye.
Sears.
Aye.
All right, so that item passes, and moving on to council. Last item on our agenda is rezoning from an R1 district and C2 commercial district to C2 at 5424 University Avenue. And JD, I think we're gonna hit everyone tonight. So,
thank you, Mr. Lieber. Yes, this is another rezoning case for tonight. It's for direct appliance rezoning request from R1 and C2 to C2. As you can see, this property is located on University Avenue and is right beside Happy Hippo Car Wash. Just to run the little bit background of this property, this property is part of it is a lot 1 of Fogdall University Avenue minor plat, which was platted in 2006. The applicant purchased this property in 2008 with 2 existing buildings, which were done in 1970s and 80s. So part of the proposal for this project is to rezone from R1 and C2 to C2 to get rid of split zoning. This property currently has 3/4 area in C2 zoning district and 1/4 area in R1 zoning district. So that's one of the idea for the rezoning. And the other part of the proposal includes to expand commercial use of the property by adding 2 additions and an existing and a paving area, which is highlighted in red, to support the truck turnaround movements for this business. As you can see, the purple dashed line indicates the split zoning boundary. So right side is C2 zoned, the left side is R1 zoned. The surrounding properties to the west are all residential zone, and surrounding property to the north are all residential property as well. And the property to the east are C2 zoning district, just for the background. When we look at a rezoning, the first analysis that we do is to evaluate 3 criteria. One is whether the property comply with the comprehensive plan and future land use map. As you can see on the screen, the entire area to be rezoned is under neighborhood commercial and mixed use area. Sorry, it's under community commercial, and it aligns with this request. They are not changing the use, they are trying to just expand the current use. The second thing that we evaluate is the available access to public services, which it is. So currently the property has access to all sorts of services, and available adequate access to roadway access to the property, which is along University Avenue. So the property does comply by all 3 criteria. Upon analysis, we have 2 major concerns for this project. One is the adjacent drainage way, which you can see on the screen. It's very dashed line. I don't think you might read it. It was in the staff report. There's an adjacent drainage way abutting the west property line, and the loss of visual buffer. So because it's a residential zone next door, I think visual buffer is something that we require, to maintain the privacy of a resident versus screening the commercial business from the residence area. However, there are few staff notes that I would just like to address. Is we want to maintain existing vegetation as is, and add screening to create a visual buffer between 2 properties to meet the parking lot peripheral screening requirements, because they will be adding on to the paved area, and to maintain the stormwater as per city standards and engineering staff's recommendation. Just wanted to point down 2 pictures. These are existing pictures of the site. As you can see, there's a vegetation that grows, and there are also mature trees. We are not sure how far this development is going to go, so we have no idea about are this all going to be removed, or are they going to be retained, but we want to ensure that this be retained and peripheral screening requirements be added. There are a few technical comments that the staff has put in the staff report and is working with the applicant. One of them was the CFE notes that the gas service, 3-phase electrical and communication fiber lines are in the new construction area, and they will have to be relocated by CFU at owner's expense. The other thing was a stormwater improvement be done as per city standard to avoid any issues. We need the correct legal description of the entire lot to be rezoned, as the lot has been platted already, and we need the updated zoning exhibit. And we want to state that the applicant is working to submit the revised site plan with setbacks and landscaping information, incorporating staff's comments. With that, I would like to add that we have received updated plan from the applicant. It does address the issues that staff made, and upon conversation with engineering staff, it looks like the stormwater will be managed more on site than depending on the natural drainage way, as per engineer's comment. So those two things are addressed by the applicant. With that, I wanted to add one more thing before we move to recommendation is, we received a phone call, a potential neighbor of this property who indicated they might be opposing to this rezoning because they have concerns about the noise that the property makes, and also about the drainage way. So those were the two concerns that were brought out. We haven't had any written letter from the surrounding neighbors yet, but I just wanted to state for the record. So with that, the staff recommends setting up date of public hearing for September 22nd to consider rezoning for this property at 5424 University from R1 and C2 to C2 district. I'll be available for any questions. And we also have applicant and the owner's representative here in the City Hall. If they would like to add something, they may, and I'm available for questions, and they will be as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, JD. With that, anyone from the applicant, anything to add?
No. I'll just briefly speak. I know it's been a long night.
Name and address, please.
Chris Cummings, Turnkey Associates, 3015 Greyhound Drive, Waterloo. Carl and Tom with Direct Appliance have committed to this property. They have investigated other properties, but they, over the last couple years with COVID, have grown exponentially. About a year ago, we finished a remodel of the exterior of the existing showroom, added stone and brick and a new vestibule to create a better environment. The addition onto the existing concrete block warehouse would also carry that through. As JD said, I've been in conversation with engineering and Cedar Falls Utilities. We've worked out the details that they were talking about. The drainage ditch to the west will have a reduced amount of water going into it because we are going to keep all the paving water on site and connect to the existing storm sewer on University Avenue. So actually the adjacent properties will have less water coming from this property than it does right now. So as I said, they have a commitment to this property and really want to move forward to help expand their business. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to the item? You could state your name and address, please.
I'm Tom Moe, and I live on Terrace Drive right behind this place. They're a good neighbor to us. We appreciate them. The only thing is there's a row of trees between us and them. And here, I don't know what I'm talking about here, except I don't want those trees gone because it hides that business from us. So we're very fortunate. Another thing is the water. He talked about the water. When I moved into Terrace Drive, I had water in my sump pump for 3 months in every spring, and it just poured in there and then go away. They built that car wash up beside me. They did something. I have nothing come through my sump pump. So I'm saying, okay, if we build that rascal, is there some way, and he's talked about maybe cutting some of the water down, if there would be something they could look into that would shut it off, because 2 of my neighbors get flooded every once in a while in their basement. And maybe that has nothing to do with rezoning at all. That was my concern when he talked about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Could the applicant speak to the trees at all?
The trees to the north are actually they actually belong to the Happy Hippo property. There's a buffer between Direct Appliance and the Terrace Drive properties that's actually owned by Happy Hippo. So those trees are nothing part of this project. The property of the west, there are 2 trees, overstory trees right now, that will have to come out, but they're also damaged and pose a danger to the adjacent residents. So those trees will come out. Some of the bushes along the west property line will end up coming out. We will replant to maintain the screening. So,
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments online?
Nothing online.
Okay. With that, I'll bring it back to the commission. Again, this is, we're intending to set a public hearing for the 22nd, and we would need a motion to do that.
I'd move to set public hearing.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the item? All right, roll call vote. Karen?
Hartley?
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
Leeper?
Aye.
Lynch?
Aye.
Prideaux?
Aye.
Saul?
Aye.
Schrod?
Aye.
Sears?
Aye.
Any commission updates? If they are, make them quick.
I have no updates.
That's great. With that, I would entertain a motion to
So moved.
adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Have a good night.